And next up we have doctoral candidate Tatu Leppämäki, who's a GIS wizard, meaning that he's focusing more on developing geoinformatics methods in the context of nature-based tourism. So go ahead, Tatu.
Yes, thank you, Vokko, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, I'll pick up somewhat where Aina left off. So this information needs, I give a type of retrospective and some future perspectives of how these big data sources and big analysis have been used in the research of our lab in these projects that have been ongoing now for a decade or so. So starting off with some similar or familiar topics by now. So every minute of the day, some 16,000 TikToks are created, some 250 million emails are sent, and 3 million snaps are sent. Last year, an estimate of 150 million zettabytes of data was created. So it's not a matter of data. It is safe to say that this is a huge influx of information, of a deluge. And from that flow, a significant chunk is spatially referenced in one way or another. And that user-generated information exists from social media platforms, spot tracking applications. They are collected passively from mobile phone, as we've seen many times today. They exist in enthusiast apps. They exist in interest expressed to website clicks and from many other sources. But how would one go about using that information to approach those information needs, for example, that Aina entered her presentation with? Again, this will be familiar by this point, but I'll approach it by reciting to you a poem by Rudyard Kipling, the writer known for Jungle Book. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when, and how and where and who. So, like old Rudyard over 100 years ago, we too have employed these questions for our advantage in this research to structure the spatial and temporal and demographic and thematic explorations of people-nature interactions with various big data sources. And next, I'll show you some examples from past research, and let's keep this working men, these W's, with us. So starting with spatio-temporal analysis, questions of when and where. These plots from research back in 2017 show that at large scale, national parks that are popular on social media platforms, they are also the ones that are popular when compared to those measurements on the ground. And this is a fact that's true both in South Africa at the top and in Finland, so these various study areas. At the more finer grain, you can also zoom in to, for example, the city of Helsinki. So here an example on the left, the presence of people in Helsinki's green areas is presented based on mobile phone data, and those hotspots of presence emerge quite well. And on the right, there is the hourly temporal patterns across a day using the same sort of data set, and it nicely shows these 2 peaks that emerge in the central park of Helsinki during the morning commute and in the afternoon recreation. So spatial and temporal patterns can be captured with this sort of data. Next, the questions of the thematic and demographic sorts. So what do people do, why they perhaps prefer some things over others, and who they are. And these type of questions can be probed with, for example, content analysis of social media posts. And in our research, in the research of this lab, by my colleagues and alumni of the group, so approach with various approaches related to manual analysis or computer vision or natural language processing. And with those methods, so for example, in this example, tells about the preferences and interests of visitors in Kruger National Park in South Africa, and how those social media posts, content of the social media posts match with stated interest in a survey. So the plot compares those who expressed interest in certain large-bodied mammals in a survey, those lighter bars, versus those mammals that were present in social media posts, Instagram posts. So they match quite nicely, except for a few outliers. In other types of approaches, you can describe, you can have limited knowledge at least of where people come from, so background demographic information, one example of it, either through relying on existing metadata, for example, through mobile phone operator contracts or the history of sort of their presence and activities, or then we can derive them based on information volunteered by users. So in this example, the social media platform Flickr, some 400,000 users were geolocated based on the home location that they shared on their profile. And that's normalized by the number of inhabitants. And as you can see, it's quite skewed. But still, we know something about the people who use these platforms. And then when we use that information, we know something about the visitors to these places. So with this small selection of examples, I hope you got some view of how these big data sources can be used to explore spatial, temporal, thematic, and demographic questions related to nature visitations, and perhaps match those with some of the information needs of natural area managers and policymakers. Of course, not all, nearly all. Already Aina pointed out some questions that are hard to impossible to answer with these type of approaches. Still, the academic possibility of using this data is not enough. I already promised in the title of this talk to discuss how to derive relevant information. Then perhaps we should still look at the sixth working man of Rudyard Kipling, the question of how. So how can this data be used for knowledge production and for management and policy making related to recreational use of nature? There's a nice process chart from previous research that sort of shows one path from a research question towards these different steps of data acquisition, storage, processing, analysis, and then finally, hopefully, meaningful knowledge. But this is no simple process, possibly, especially for those outside of academia, outside of research. So, and there are issues for that. Like in addition to those research that explore these possibilities, there's also been at all times this elimination of issues and considerations and limitations that affect the use of these big data sources that are, yes, important for research, but also for operational management and planning. These issues include such, well, issues that already come up quite a lot today. So data availability. So these large data sets of mobility and presence are almost always held by large corporations instead of, for example, public bodies. And these corporations can and will stop access to these sources at their discretion. And there are, of course, real ethical issues related to use of this type of data sets, which are quite sensitive. Then spatiotemporal coverage, which is quite variant, which places are actually present in these data sets. And especially when moving beyond the urban areas where there's a lot of people moving to rural areas, moving to nature, so then those issues of coverage become all the more drastic. And once you apply thematic and spatiotemporal filters, so then you actually move quite quickly from big data to small data or no data. So then finally, when you need to do some analysis, you need to process this data, then that becomes an issue of skills and resources, both computational and monetary. And finally, as all data sets, these data sets too have issues of demographic and spatial sort of biases that are present in them, related, for example, to gender, age. And this map already flashed by quite quickly previously, so it shows the distribution of this Flickr data. And if you can see, there's some quite nice presence of data in Europe, and then there are areas of the globe that are almost completely non-existent in this data set. So, to conclude, there's a push for knowledge-based decision-making, for example, for management and planning related to outdoor recreation and policy-making in natural and protected areas. So taking into account all of these data strengths and all of their shortcomings, how can we make all of those explicit and arrive at meaningful knowledge? Could we, for example, produce something meaningful about nature visits throughout Finland, and what would that require, and what type of caveats would you need to make for that? So this type of data access and issues are also very much present, as they have been in previous presentations. They're here as well, and I hope to explore some of those issues still during my PhD. Thank you.